I am reciting the Focus on Europe Today project, and I have chosen the Algerian minority in France. I will talk about the relationship between the Algerian and French people. I will talk about the Algerian people in France now, and I will talk a little bit about the history that French and Algerian people have. First of all, I would like you to watch a video, just a short introduction to introduce you to the topic.
Welcome back to the report. Recent events in Paris have led many to question the meaning of French national identity. Sadia Chowdhury has been visiting the Algerian community in Paris and brings us this special report.
It was a silent demonstration that gathered here in Paris yesterday afternoon, none of the usual chanting you may find at a rally of this kind. An occasional round of applause broke out, but in the thick of 1 million or so people, there were no loud speeches, no banging on drums, and no singing. You could say this epitomizes the last 50 years of French society, a nation that readily comes together but says little to each other about what's really going on. For over half a century, the French have been largely muted on the issue of the Algerian War of Independence, a bloody and brutal struggle where over 1.5 million Arab Muslims were killed, and a conflict that was only recognized as a war in 1999. Today, Algerians make up 5 million of France's 6 million or so strong North African community. Many of them live in Marseille, where following last week's attacks, they came out to condemn the violence.
Il faut absolument aujourd'hui que les imams, les responsables des associations,
Today, imams and community leaders and Muslims in general must have a greater participation in our daily life, speak a little louder and a little more clearly, and freely to avoid allowing the shadows to take over.
Muslim leaders in France called on the community to join yesterday's rallies in support of solidarity and the French ideals of liberty, equality and fraternity. But at least here in Paris, the Algerian community could barely be seen. Later that evening, we found them getting on with their day in Barbès, the Algerian quarter of the city. Yes, they were aware of what's been going on.
So, now that you watched the video, I want to tell you what I'm going to talk about. First of all, I'm going to tell you about the current situation in France regarding the Algerian minority. Then I will explain a little bit about the Algerian War and the French involvement in it. I will talk about how the politicians currently talk about the Algerian minority and what their opinions are. And after all this information, we will be able to conclude how the Algerian minority is actually doing in France. Thank you. French Algerians are one of the biggest ethnic minority groups in France. An estimated 5 million of France's population has Algerian roots. The main cause of this is that Algeria was a French colony for 132 years. Algeria has been a French colony from 1830 to 1962. The political uncertainty in Algeria was the main cause for many Algerians to immigrate to France. A good example of the immigration still hasn't stopped from Algeria to France is the year 2006, when 700,000 Algerians came straight from Algeria and settled in France. There is dissatisfaction among the Algerian Muslim community because they lack political and economical status in the new colonial system. They demanded a greater political autonomy, a self-governing state. The relationship between Algeria and France that was formed during the 132 years of colonial rule did not end in 1962, when Algeria gained its independence. This long period of occupation has left a permanent mark on the social structure of both societies, influencing their culture, identities, and politics. Many Algerians had fought during the Second World War as French soldiers, and this was also the reason why Algerian Muslims were even more unjust about the fact that their vote was not equal to the vote of the other Algerians, especially after 1947, when the Algerian Assembly was created. The assembly was composed of 120 members, 120 members, and the Algerian Muslims were representing 6.85 million of the people, and they could designate 50% of the assembly members. But they thought it wasn't fair that the non-Algerian Muslims, who were representing only 1.5 million of the people, also could designate 50% of the assembly members. Moreover, a massacre occurred in Sétif on the 8th of May in 1945. It opposed Algerians who were demonstrating for the national claim of the French army. But after altercations with the police, 100 French were killed. The French army retaliated harshly, and this resulted in deaths of 6,000 Algerian people. This was a trigger for Algerian nationalists, for radicalization of Algerian nationalists, and this was seen as the beginning of the Algerian War. In 1956, there were about 500,000 French soldiers in Algeria. As the Algerian War started in 1954, there were already 200,000 immigrants in France. But because of the tensions between the two nations, Algerian immigrants were no longer welcome in France. The conflict between the two nations led to the Paris massacre on the 17th of October in 1961, when the police used force against Algerians that were demonstrating on the streets of Paris. Around 200 people were killed by the police. After the war, when Algeria gained its independence, the free circulation between Algeria and France was again allowed. And what happened? The number of Algerian immigrants increased drastically. From 1962 to 1975, there was an increase of 350,000 immigrants. There were I can tell you something about the immigrants. There were two types of immigrants. One were called the Harkis. The Harkis were the Algerians who supported the French during the Algerian War. But after the war ended, they were resented by the other Algerian people, so they had to flee to France. The other group of immigrants is called the Pied Noirs, and these were European settlers who moved to Algeria, but now were migrating back to France. During the war, there was a slogan used, Algerie Française. It was used around 1962 by those who wanted to keep Algeria ruled by France. The slogan, which was Algerie Française, literally meant French Algeria, and this meant that the three departments of Algeria were considered integral parts of France. In Paris, during traffic jams, adherence to the slogan was indicated by soundings one automobile horn in the form of 4 telegraphic dots followed by a dash. This was the same thing that was used during the Second World War when the V for victory. It was first 3 dots and then a dash. So it was the intention of this was that the opponents of Algerie Française were to be considered as traitorous as the collaborators with Germany during the occupation of France. So now I would like to go to the political side of the Algerian France. So now I would like to continue with telling something about the politicians in France. How are they responding to the Algerian minority? What are they saying about them? What are they saying about the colonial rule? So I have a little video for you. It's about 40 seconds. It's about President Hollande. It is in 2012, so it's a while ago, 5 years. But it was very important because it was the beginning of a president that started to talk openly about the Algerian massacre. So.
The French President François Hollande spoke out on a visit to Algeria, saying that France had played a contentious role in suppressing the Algerian people. Speaking in French, he said, "For 132 years, Algeria was under a system which was profoundly unjust and brutal. This system has a name, it's colonization. And I acknowledge here the sufferings that colonization has inflicted on the Algerian people. Amongst those sufferings were the massacres of Sétif, of Guelma, of Gerata, which I know are still rooted in the Algerians' conscience, but also in that of the French." Hollande's comments on the 1954 to 1962 Algerian War, which ended in Algerian independence and France's withdrawal, are likely to be carefully analysed for signs they could help remove lingering resentment about the conflict in both countries. But he stopped short of an apology to the oil-rich North African state that Paris sees as a potential major trading partner. I'm Anne Salter, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the very latest news and updates on this story with me at ibtimes.co.uk.
So now that you watched the video, I want to tell something about President Hollande. The presidential encourage of President Hollande in Algeria was one of the biggest ever, and he was the first French head of state that addressed both houses of the parliament in Algiers since the country's independence in 1962. Hollande was also the first president who broke the state silence about the killing of 200 Algerian people during the pro-independence demonstration in Paris in 1961. He was recognizing the bloody repression of thousands of Algerians living in the mainland of France. What Hollande's trip to Algeria fails to acknowledge, however, is how oppressed so many French Algerians still feel in France today. This is not because of what happened to their grandparents or because of the war. This is because of the divisive way in France that people are treating the immigrants and viewing them as immigrants instead of citizens. France has been denying political rights and using overwhelming force for decades to maintain its colony created to a two-tier system. This involved, in simple terms, a ruling French class and a servile Algerian one. This is why French Algerian communities still live in impoverished housing estates, go to bad schools, and have fewer opportunities in social advancement. But what are other politicians saying? So, on the populist right wing, politicians like Marine Le Pen and Nicolas Sarkozy are portraying immigrants as the enemy within. So they are saying that Algerian immigrants, are the enemy within France. Of course, this is not making the Algerian minority group in France feeling good. They are imposing their foreign lifestyle as an otherwise prosperous, forward-thinking and modern democracy. Marine Le Pen, she says that immigration from Algeria comes with an increased risk of terrorism attacks. The circumstance of not really being accepted in either country, for example for the cow cheese, is familiar to large numbers of French nationals of Algerian heritage, and particularly from the second and third generation of immigrants. This is also a big problem for the French Algerians in France. Now I would like to tell you something about the economic relations between Algeria and France. How are they now? Economic and trade relations have grown rapidly since 1991 and are especially intense. In 2004, France became Algeria's second largest partner with a market share of 10.9%, but the French market share has been declining because of increasing competition, and France has seemed to benefit less proportionally from the relative opening up of the Algerian economy than its competitors. So we have came to almost the end of the presentation, and that's why I would like to summarize a few things for you so you don't forget it and you know what the main points of this presentation actually were. The French Algerians are the biggest ethnic minority, is the biggest ethnic minority group in France, and an estimated 5 million of France's population has Algerian roots. The main cause for the Algerian immigrants to immigrate to France is because of the fact that Algeria was a colony of France for 132 years. This was the case from 1830 to 1962. The political uncertainty in Algeria caused many Algerians to immigrate to France. The long period of occupation has left a permanent mark on the social structure of both societies that influences their identities, culture, and politics. After the war, Algeria gained its independence, and the free circulation between France and Algeria was once again allowed. And what the consequence of this was that the number of Algerian immigrants in France started to increase drastically. Algerie Française was a slogan used around the 1960s by those who wanted to keep Algeria ruled by France. Meanwhile, the populist right-wing politicians like Marine Le Pen and Nicolas Sarkozy are portraying migrants, Algerian migrant communities, as France's enemies within. Also, Marine Le Pen is saying that having Algerian immigrants in France is an increased risk of terrorism, brings an increased risk of terrorism. So, to conclude, everyone would agree that Algerian migrants in France constitute to a population confronted with particular difficulties. And because of these difficulties, they have many difficulties in terms of integration into French society and follow a different path than other minority groups in France that migrated there in the 19th century when France was the center of mass immigration. These difficulties are often contributed to the fact that Algeria was a colony of France for 132 years and could only gain its independence on the cost of a war. This has marked the relation between the two countries ever since. So this was my presentation. Thank you all for listening. I hope you have enjoyed it and learned something from it. So thank you very much and bye, have a good day.